let's define some of these characteristics for our function. Non-permissible values of x. What can x not be? 0, right? We can't divide by 0. That was pretty obvious from our table, right? We tried dividing by 0 and we got an undefined value. What is the behavior of the graph near the non-permissible value?
Undefined.
What's happening around this point here? What is the graph doing?
Running away.
It's running away from it, basically, right? Could put running away. We could say, maybe more formally, going into positive and negative infinity. It's maybe a better way of saying it. But it is running away, right? Because it's continually dividing by a smaller and smaller number. And when you divide by something between 0 and 1, it actually makes it bigger, right? So that's why it goes into positive and negative infinity. Your book will also ask you about end behavior. End behavior basically means if you're looking at your graph and you're thinking about what happens as I go forever to the right and forever to the left, as x becomes really, really large in either direction, what is the graph doing? Can you imagine it?
Getting smaller. It's getting closer to the line.
It's getting closer to the x-axis, right? We suspect that at least. Okay, we'd have to graph it and check 10,000, 100,000 x values out what actually is happening. Maybe it crosses, but it's likely that there's an asymptote on the x-axis. Okay, so graph is approaching x-axis. Okay, so just keep in mind when they ask you about the end behavior, they're asking what happens to y as you go forever out and forever to the right and to the left. Okay, so y is essentially becoming 0 is another way of saying that, right?
So what is like the end of the graph and y 0?
What is happening as you reach the end of the graph?
Okay.
As you go really, really large out, right? Y is essentially becoming 0 because the graph is getting closer and closer and closer to that x-axis, making it eventually 0. Could it ever equal 0? Maybe that's important to think about.
Well, if it was shifted, it could, right?
If it's shifted, it could. But if you went 10 divided by a number, could you get 0?
No.
Is there any way to do that? No. You think maybe 0, but you can't do that, right? 10 divided by 0 is just undefined. So that maybe helps to also think or to prove that this is an asymptote, because you can never get a value of y equal to 0. Domain should be pretty straightforward by now. Values of x. Any restrictions on x?
Cannot be 0.
Can't be 0, right? So that's pretty straightforward. X can equal 0, and it's an element of real numbers. It can be everything else except 0, because you can't divide by that. And then the range is basically the same thing, right? We've got an asymptote on y equals 0. So we can't equal 0 for y. And it's an element of all real numbers. Oh, I wrote the same word twice. The equation of the vertical asymptote.
And what's supposed to be horizontal then?
The second one's supposed to be horizontal. I'll change that in a second. What's the equation of the vertical asymptote? The one that goes up and down like this. What's the equation of that line?
So y equals 0.
This would be y equals 0.
X is equal to 0.
X equals 0 is this one, right? Vertical is x equal. Okay, so this would be x equals 0, and then y equals 0 would be the horizontal. You just need to change that there. Horizontal. Okay, so those are some of the characteristics of this graph, and when I ask you to describe the characteristics of a graph in your assignment, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, things like this.